Uh, I wanted to say a few words about this strange profession of economics, my profession, also to pick up on our profession, the three of us in front here, and a bit of a mystery of how economics, as it's predominantly taught, which is an economics that I would argue was mostly developed in Britain, and then became, after World War II, an American economics, and from the British-US predominance over the last 200 years became the leading university economics around the world, taught almost everywhere. If you look at Chinese textbooks, textbooks in Africa, textbooks in Latin America, they're my textbooks or other people's textbooks that are translated. They are not local textbooks except in very recent years. So I believe that modern economics is mainly an Anglo-American creation and a very strange philosophical offshoot, which left behind 2,000 preceding years of philosophical thought by assumptions that were taken up by especially British philosophers and theologians starting in the 16th and 17th century, became codified in the great work of Adam Smith, which was then mathematized over the next 150 years and which served many purposes, especially that of wealthy, rich, and powerful people and a wealthy, rich, and powerful empire, the British Empire, and then the American Empire, which is fading away now, but is still a very powerful fact of the world. There's a lot to say about this, and again, 4 minutes left. The positive side Helen mentioned, which is that an ethic and philosophy of improvement, of economic improvement, really flourished in Britain. And I give a lot of credit, and I admire very much Francis Bacon in this, who was also a very religious figure, very much a deep Protestant thinker who believed that the book of nature was to be read along with the scriptures, and that the book of nature led to the possibility of a restoration of the Edenic past. And so this was a religious and philosophical idea. But in practical terms, he urged that we learn to read the book of nature through experimentation. And that gave a lot of impetus to the scientific revolution. It's not the only thread, but it's an important one, and a very constructive one in many, many ways. But things took a strange turn, in my view. Hobbes is one. I'm going to leave him aside for the moment in the interest of time. I'll go to John Locke, who gave us all sorts of terrible ideas, along with a few good ones. The good ones were about ideas of legitimate government. The bad ones were about what legitimacy of government meant, which for Locke was protecting property rights above all. Almost nothing else was legitimate in Locke's view. And Locke wrote lots of nasty things, actually, which is strange to read. But I want to read one quick part, because he wrote about the poor laws at the end, towards the end of his life. And he said, if the causes of this evil be well looked into, we humbly conceive it will be found to have proceeded neither from the scarcity of provisions nor from the want of employment for the poor, since the goodness of God has blessed these times with plenty no less than former, and a long peace during these reigns give us plentiful trade as ever. The growth of the poor must therefore have some other cause, and it could be nothing else but the relaxation of discipline and the corruption of manners, virtue and industry being as constant companions on the one side as vice and idleness are on the other. The first step, therefore, towards the setting of the poor on work, we humbly conceive, ought to be a restraint of their debauchery by a strict execution of the laws provided against it, more particularly by the suppression of superfluous brandy shops and unnecessary alehouses. Could all the able hands in England be brought to work, the greatest part of the burden that lies upon the industrious for the maintenance of the poor would immediately cease. So by the time we get to Locke, the poor are just a burden. How do you address this terrible burden? Not by any empathy, any sympathy, any mercy. It is to overcome their indolence. It's a very Calvinistic vision. And it is a vision that the poor have only themselves to blame, and that the sign of poverty is a sign of God's disfavor, after all. Locke goes on, by the way, that if any boy or girl under 14 years of age shall be found begging out of the parish where they dwell, they shall be sent to the next working school, there to be soundly whipped and kept at work till evening. Or if they live further than 5 miles from that place, then they be sent to the next house of correction, there to remain at work 6 weeks, and so much longer as till the next session at the end of 6 weeks. So lock up the children. This is our great philosopher that is the founder of the American ideology. He says, besides the grown people, the children of laboring people are an ordinary burden to the parish and are usually maintained in idleness, so that their labor also is generally lost to the public till they are 12 or 14. The most effectual remedy for this that we were able to conceive, and which we therefore humbly propose, is that in the aforementioned new law to be enacted, it be further provided that working schools be set up in every parish, to which children of all such demand relief above 3 and under 14, 3-year-olds. So this is already an extraordinary, I thought it was a spoof. It sounds like Jonathan Swift, but this is John Locke, and it's real. And all through the 17th and 18th century, the poor is measured by their burden on the taxpayers, and by holding back, and by their unworthiness, and by obviously the demonstration that we are that they are only of their own responsibility. I'll skip Hume for the moment. I have an ongoing discussion. Owen is trying to warm me up to Hume. I keep relapsing. I can't quite get there. But I want to talk about Smith just briefly. Smith is a genius, and The Wealth of Nations is a brilliant work. And Smith also had a great human decency, but he had a major failing, in my view, which was a theological issue, in my opinion, which is a providentialist view, which said, in the end, everything will come out all right, because the invisible hand is not a metaphor for Smith, saying, as we teach in the first day of economics, isn't it remarkable how this self-organizing system works? The invisible hand for Smith, from all I have been able to understand from a lot of scholarship on this, is really a providentialist view, which says, in the end, the market is a bit like the heavens. It is ordered by God for the best that can be. And I want to read very briefly from the Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is usually taken to be the more merciful side of Smith. He says that the produce of soil maintains at all times nearly that number of inhabitants which is capable of maintaining. The rich only select from the heap what is most precious and agreeable. They consume little more than the poor. And in spite of their natural selfishness and rapacity, though they mean only their own conveniency, though the sole end which they propose from the labors of all the thousands whom they employ be the gratification of their own vain and insatiable desires, They divide with the poor the produce of all their improvements. They are led by an invisible hand to make nearly the same distribution of the necessaries of life, which would have been made had the earth been divided into equal portions among all its inhabitants, and thus, without intending it, without knowing it, advance the interest of society and afford means to the multiplication of the species. When Providence divided the earth among a few lordly masters, it neither forgot nor abandoned those who seemed to have been left out in the partition. So what Smith is saying is, don't worry so much. The rich spend a lot on people. They have thousands of retainers and so on, but it all comes out just as if we were dividing it in a normal way. That is providentialism of a particular kind. Smith was an optimist. He was a providentialist. He believed that it wasn't God's work on earth that we do. It was ordained that the system of markets would entail essentially the same distribution as if there were an equal distribution. Just to finish, many other facets absolutely are part of the Anglo-American economic ethics history. There is a profoundly deep strain of racism in all the great philosophers, by the way, including Kant, including the British philosophers, including Mill. When you get down to it, there is a civilized race. And this is found in unusual places in these texts. Second, Darwinism, though it wasn't the only cause of it, amplified a lot of these trends by creating a social Darwinism, which was not the only reading of Darwin, but a major reading of Darwin in the Anglo-American world, that life is a struggle and the superior win. And that is the natural base, both for individuals and societies, especially on a global scale. Third, American Protestantism developed a gospel of prosperity, which is basically Calvinism in the American backwoods, which is if you're poor, something's wrong with you. Probably your faith in God is not adequate. If you will only be more trusting in God, more believing, God will literally fill your bank account. And the rhetoric of filling the bank account is very, very explicit in these mega churches of America. This is it's an anti-government approach very strongly. There's no social responsibility, it's only individual responsibility, which follows, of course, the Calvinist line. There was and is a strong anti-communist element to it. Hayek became the hero of the American right after World War II because he warned that social ownership was the road to serfdom, the road to communism, and he was championed and feted for a work which is about the worst prediction imaginable, actually, because he wrote that even the social welfare state would destroy democracy, but the social welfare democracies are the most powerful democracies, the most robust democracies in the world, whereas the more libertarian democracies like the United States are barely surviving as democracies at this point. Mm-hmm. But in any event, that was one more theme. And then deep libertarianism from Locke, Hayek, Nozick, and others also pervades the field. So all of this is to say that what's in our textbooks is very strange because also Marx did a very mischievous turn by calling Adam Smith the classical economist, and he cut off 2,000 years of classical thought by saying that classicism begins in 1776. So we lost Aristotle, we lost Christian ethics, we lost Thomist philosophy. None of it shows up anywhere explicitly in economic reasoning. Where we really start is with the will, the personal desires and a providentialist order, whether crudely and wittily put by Mandeville or more subtly put by Adam Smith, said, go after your desires, you'll make a better world, and enough will go around for everybody. Thank you.